For the record, my name is Paul LeClerc, and I'm the President and Chief Executive Officer of the New York Public Library, and I'm here to ask you and the other members of the Council, respectfully but in the strongest terms possible, not to let comprehensive public library services be taken away from the people of New York City. Anyone with his or her eyes open knows and acknowledges that success today depends on information, access to it, and the skills to use it. And it's been recognized, at least since the time of Jefferson, who said that information is the currency of a democracy, that a more just society is founded on the notion that people have an inherent right to free access to information. So I think the question before the City Council today, and really before both branches of city government, as it defines its spending priorities in an admittedly very tough fiscal climate, is the following. What should the city's investment be in the one, the single, the unique organization whose sole purpose of existence is to provide everyone with free access to the ever-expanding universe of information today? Or, to go back to Jefferson, to the kinds of places embedded in every single neighborhood in our city that lets every child, every teenager, every adult, every senior citizen get as much of the currency of democracy as he or she wishes, that is, information. My argument this morning is a simple one, that public libraries are more essential to the welfare of New Yorkers and therefore to our city than ever before, that libraries are being used in record numbers in all of our systems because the people of the communities that you represent know and appreciate how these libraries add immense value to their lives and the lives of their families, and finally that investing in public libraries costs the city very, very little money. Basically 0.5% of the entire city operating budget of more than $60 billion. So approximately $350 million or so is 0.5% of the entire budget that you'll be passing at some point for the next fiscal year. But I think that this is the single smartest investment that you can make in the welfare of our citizens and in the results that you're going to get per dollar spent. I mean, we really give you so much for so very, very little. I'm really grateful, as always, to have the opportunity to appear before you in testimony. And I'm joined this morning by Dave Offenson, who's our Chief Operating Officer, by Ann Carson, who's our Vice President for Library Services, and by Sharon Hewitt-Watkins, who is our Vice President for Finance. When I testified before you on March 26th regarding the preliminary budget, I described in detail the impact of the then proposed $33 million cut to the New York Public Library, which included a fiscal year 2010 mid-year reduction of $6 million, as well as some additional cuts. In my remarks at that time, I spoke of the many ways in which the New York Public Library is serving our communities and the impact that those cuts would have on our services. Unfortunately, the executive budget that has been released since that testimony creates a scenario that is significantly worse than the one that I discussed in March. The proposed $37 million reduction to NYPL's city operating funding is a staggering 25% reduction in our operating support. Will have a direct, adverse, negative impact on the communities of the city that depend on our library the most. Just as a reminder and as an historical footnote, in 1975-76, when the city was in its greatest fiscal crisis up until that time, when the city was basically bankrupt, the cuts to libraries were 10%. So this is 2.5 times as big a cut as we received then. So in this testimony, like my colleagues, I'd like to outline the devastating impact that a reduction of this magnitude would have on the services that we provide to our communities and particularly to the most vulnerable members of those communities. And I'll also discuss in detail how these cuts will impact library operations. I think we all know and appreciate that reading is the single most powerful tool available for building vocabulary and improving writing, spelling, and comprehension skills. And yet, according to the statistics of the Department of Education, we're still in a situation in New York where 3 out of every 10 youngsters in grades 3 to 8 are not meeting the necessary standards of the New York State English Language Arts Test. Library reading programs, however, help youngsters retain the skills that they've already acquired, and they markedly improve the reading achievement of children, many of whom lack access to books and to other reading materials in their daily lives. therefore better preparing them for school and for school success. In fact, in the last 12 months alone, our libraries in the New York Public Library System have hosted over 5,364 K-12 classes, providing access to books, computers, librarians, and much, much more. If these cuts are enacted, however, fewer books, fewer days and hours of libraries being open, fewer staff will be there to help them, and the libraries will be severely reduced, as will the educational attainment of children in New York City. There's a very, very important new study that's been published by the federal government, and I've asked that the executive summary of that study be attached to my testimony. It was funded by the Gates Foundation, and what it indicates quite clearly is that in the United States of America, 1 out of every 3 people goes to a public library for access to the internet. So 33% of all Americans on an annual basis go to a public library. That's certainly the case in New York. Those lower down on the socioeconomic ladder tend to go to libraries even more for internet access than do more affluent Americans. Those below the poverty line have exceptionally high rates of going to public libraries for internet access. About 50% of senior citizens living below the poverty line use internet access at public libraries for information on health and on medical assistance. 46% of teenagers who live below the poverty line go to public libraries in America for help in academic achievement, for schoolwork. So the thought of denying these kinds of people access to what we provide entirely for free with high quality staff and resources behind it, to me is unthinkable if you care about the future welfare of the people of our city and therefore the future welfare of our city itself. Here are the kinds of things that some patrons of the New York Public Library have written to us in the recent past. Mary O'Hara wrote to say, quote, "Growing up poor on the Lower East Side, I attended public schools with low resources, and I don't know what I would have done without the free library books that the library made available. Now I'm on a full scholarship at a prestigious liberal arts college. I never could have done it without NYPL. Save the library, and you save a future for countless kids." Or another patron, Gary Feigenbaum, who wrote to us, and I quote, "As a poor kid living in the Sedgwick Housing Project in the tiny Sedgwick Library was a venue which enabled me and many others to get entry to the Bronx High School of Science, one of the premier high schools in all of the United States. The children of Highbridge can gain entry to any school or occupation their interests, talents, and energy truly desire." And finally, from Joanna Justino, the mother of one of our youngest patrons, who wrote, and I quote, "My daughter just found out about the closures that have been proposed and asked why. I said the city didn't have the money. She said she will give them $10. She's 5.5 years old and will be graduating from kindergarten this year. She understands the value of the public library. I hope our politicians feel the same. We know that you do. We know that you really care about us and that you're behind us." These are just a few of the stories that we've heard on top of the countless acts of support from thousands of residents throughout our boroughs. And we also know that patrons within the 3 boroughs that the New York Public Library represents have so far sent 90,000 letters and emails to the mayor's office and to members of the council and to the speaker. That's 3 times as many as were sent last year, and that was a record. So 90,000, close to 100,000 written communications. In addition, we've got teenagers who are making their own advocacy buttons at the Castle Hill branch. We've got library supporters from the Woodlawn Heights branch commissioning their own T-shirts, advocating for restorations to the proposed reductions. We've got teens in our Teen Central making their own videos, and our communities are voicing the need at a grassroots level for maintaining library services in their neighborhood. People are saying all over the city, loudly and clearly, we need our libraries now more than ever before. Let me just give you a few details on what would happen were these cuts to go through. They would necessitate the elimination of 736 full-time equivalent positions. They would necessitate the consideration of the closure of up to 10 neighborhood branch libraries. They would also impact on public service hours, which would be devastating of the remaining branches, brought down to an average of 4 days a week, down from our current 6 or 7 days a week of service. The impact of a cut of this magnitude would be tremendous and tremendously negative. 5.7 million fewer items would be circulated and 1.7 fewer million books to children, 346,000 fewer visits to library programs by young people, 1.8 million fewer visits to libraries by children, 13,200 fewer slots available to attend our career counseling and job centers, 2 million fewer computer sessions, severely reduced access to seniors who often use the library in the morning. Many of these hours would be cut. 1.1 million fewer visits and 1.3 million fewer materials circulated in our lower Manhattan libraries, where 72% of the families earn less than $50,000 a year, and 45% of the residents don't have a high school diploma or a GED. 880,000 fewer visits and 632,000 fewer materials circulated to Central Bronx libraries, where 82% of the families, 82% of the people there come from families in which the family income is less than $50,000 a year. 50% of the residents of the Central Bronx lack a high school diploma, and only 33% of residents are native speakers of English. Finally, 542,000 fewer visits, 569,000 fewer items circulated, 2,100 fewer programs, and 42,000 fewer visits by school-age children to library programs in our Staten Island libraries. Conclusion, the evident. Libraries provide hope to the economically disadvantaged, inspiration to new immigrants, and a safe and nurturing space for those in need. But more importantly, libraries provide answers to those in search of knowledge and discovery. They are and will remain, I know, and I know you know, more important to New Yorkers than ever before. Just look at the 18 million times that people walk through NYPL's doors in the last year, or the 27 million visits to our website. While the impact of the recession continues to take its toll across our city, we've seen no slowdown whatsoever in the record numbers of people using our services. Millions of New Yorkers continue to use our rich collections, our interesting programs, our computer training, literacy classes, ESOL programs, homework help, job search, small business resources, and the brilliance and the talent of our staff. These are just the services that will help put people back to work and help the city climb out of the recession, and that millions of children and their parents will rely on during the summer months as well. In the past, Speaker Quinn and the City Council, all of you and others who aren't here this afternoon, have always championed the funding of this city's libraries, recognizing how totally essential our services are to New Yorkers and to the welfare of our city. We are always grateful for your support. The FY 2011 proposed budget of $37 million would cripple NYPL's ability to deliver the services that the people of this city are demanding now in record numbers. This would essentially wipe out decades of progress made in library service in New York City. So again, as I began, I really ask your support, respectfully but as strongly as I possibly can, to ensure that our doors are open, that our staff are in place, and that we can continue to help the people of New York make New York the kind of town it deserves to be. Again, thank you for the privilege of testifying before you this morning, and I'm happy to ask any questions that you may have.